Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. As you may well already know, the pizza-chomping mutant foursome known globally as the Ninja Turtles have long been one of my favourite topics on this channel. We've already covered many of the enigmatic group of sewer dwellers games on here in the past. And as we move closer to the release of the Cowabunga Collection and Shredder's Revenge, on this channel we are currently looking at the last 2D Turtles video games that were published by Konami. In this episode we're going to be checking out the often overlooked, scaled down Nintendo DS version of a 2005 6th gen Turtles game that literally no one ever talks about. That's right folks, today we are going to be looking at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 Mutant Nightmare on the DS, the third Konami handheld game based on the highly revered 2003 animated series. And although developed by another party, this is the last ever 2D Turtles game to be published by Konami. Yeah! The rebooted Ninja Turtles cartoon from 2003 originally aired on the Fox network to glowing critical reviews, extremely positive fan reception and super promising viewing figures, making it an immediate success and catapulting the Turtles franchise right back to the forefront of mainstream pop culture where it belonged. The show ran for 155 episodes over 7 seasons, which is an awful lot for a modern American animated series predominantly aimed at children, and speaks volumes about its elongated success and appeal. Fans and critics alike were delighted with the show's fresh take on the characters whilst managing to remain completely faithful to the source material. Despite the fact it was still essentially a kids show, the somewhat darker tone, well laid out stories, genuine character development and excellent use of more mature but not too mature humour meant the cartoon would garner fans of all ages, and it proved to be a hit with both young and old alike. Having series co-creator Peter Laird on board certainly helped with the authenticity, credibility and gave the show a more direct link to the original comic books that hadn't been seen in the mainstream Turtles adaptation up to that point. But it was the creators' insistence on high quality production and consistency that really made it stand out to fans. It was seen as a huge step up and massive progression from the old 1987 cartoon. This new show upped the ante in almost all conceivable ways, telling much bigger, more involved and better crafted stories on a far, far larger scale. Even the theme song and sound design was highly praised, and it wasn't long before the show became the highest rated and most watched children's television show in America. Most people who have watched every episode of this version and the original seem to agree, and generally still agree to this day, that the Fox Network's 2003 Ninja Turtles animated series is the best on-screen version of a TMT story we've ever seen. When any show is that successful and makes that much of a mark on pop culture, it's inevitable that there will be demand for it to be aired on other networks and in other regions. And as the new Turtles animation was making a shell of a lot of money, it was no exception, with the cartoon being broadcast to numerous countries over multiple channels, as well as broadening their audience and domestic reach by having it appear on the Cartoon Network and later Nicktoons back home in the States. Although the whole TV and movie-based licensed game craze had died down significantly in recent years, back in those days a show with that much hype and that much money-making potential would all be but guaranteed to have a slew of video game ports bearing its highly profitable moniker. And to the surprise of absolutely bloody no one, that's exactly what happened here. King of the arcade and long-time ally of the Turtles, Konami, were entrusted with the golden cash cow of a license and set about making a 6th gen 3D beat-em-up befitting the popular new series, with a similar, a beat toned down and too deified offering for Nintendo's glorious little GBA. This offering was released between late 2003 and early 2004 over various regions and systems to somewhat middling reviews, but with solid enough sales for a sequel to be greenlit. That came in the form of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Battle Nexus, which was released to similar reviewer apathy between late 2004 and early 2005, following the same theme as its predecessor, with the main entry being a 6th gen polygon based brawler with a 2D sister version on the Game Boy Advance, all developed in-house by those lovable scamps over at Konami. The third game in the licensed trilogy, and the one we're going to be focusing on today however, was slightly different in that instead of turning the title into a 2D side-scrolling affair and porting it to the GBA, it would instead be ported to Nintendo's shiny new, far more technologically advanced handheld, the DS. What's more, rather than being entirely made by Konami, development duties would actually go to Hudson Soft, with Konami merely releasing the game. One of the more recognisable faces of both home console and arcade game development of the 80s and 90s, Hudson and their distinctive little B logo were responsible for many iconic series, characters and franchises, including such varied and well-known titles as Bomberman, the Bonk series, Adventure Island, Lode Runner, the bloody raw 3D fighting games, and even everyone's favourite waste of time, the Mario Party series. Plenty of pedigree indeed. Konami and Hudson's long and prosperous relationship dates all the way back to 1985, when Hudson ported Konami's arcade hit Puyan to the MSX and Famicom in Japan, and it continued amicably from there. By the time Turtles 3 came out in 2005 however, the relationship had turned into a more patriarchal one, as Konami now owned just shy of 54% of Hudson, with the B-loving brand slipping down the proverbial gaming industry totem pole, with only a fraction of the influence and resources they had during their heyday. The bankruptcy and collapse of Hokkaido Takushoku in 1997, which was one of the biggest commercial banks in Japan and Hudson's main bank, really hit the company hard and forced them to enter the stock market in 2000, which was what led to Konami purchasing such a hefty amount of shares. Unfortunately, it was a financial blow they never managed to recover from, and by 2011, Konami had gone and bought the company outright, liquidating and shutting down their North American offices in the process. The end of an era. They definitely weren't considered the bee's knees anymore. That era would conclude outright in March of the following year when Hudson Soft finally buzzed off completely and ceased to exist, with their remaining operations being merged with Konami's, and no planned use of a Hudson logo or brand going forward or at any point in the future. They were now merely part of the Konami hive mind, and I promise that will be the last of the B puns. So, sad times for the company that was once considered such a gaming powerhouse. But what of the Turtles game they developed back when Konami didn't yet own the company outright? Released worldwide in November of 2005, the DS port of Mutant Nightmare follows a similar theme from its two GBA predecessors, in that it is generally a more entertaining and engaging experience than its home console big brothers, with the side-scrolling sprite-based action tending to stand the test of time a lot better than the more technologically advanced offerings from the early 3D variants. I think it's reasonable to suggest that games based on cartoons featuring a smooth, hand-drawn style of animation lend themselves far better to the look and control one gets from sprites in a 2D game than that of polygons in the third dimension. Anyway, Turtles 3 features beautifully detailed and layered backgrounds with tons of parallax scrolling that really pop off the DS screen. Character models and animations are also really well done and clear despite not being excessively detailed, with each individual turtle looking distinct and recognisable. There is a map permanently displayed on the bottom screen during regular gameplay, similar to what one might see in any of the many Metroidvania style games found on the system, although progression is a bit more linear than you would find in any of those titles. Mutant Nightmare on DS also makes surprisingly good and surprisingly not that intrusive use of a touchscreen and stylus, with some innovative mini-game style segments scattered throughout, bringing some much welcome variety to proceedings. The main story mode features a mix of platforming and beat 'em up elements with all the usual tropes you would associate with those two genres present. Players can jump, crawl, hang from ledges and do that spinny hanging pole jumpy thing that usually gets seen in these games. Much like almost every arcade brawler ever made, players have a fairly long energy meter, and there is a jump button, an attack button and a special move button that drains a small amount of your own life bar if it successfully connects with an enemy. There are the usual various collectibles, buffs and energy refilling health boosts scattered throughout each section, with items usually appearing at the most needed and opportune times. Players get to choose which turtle to control at the start of the game, but all of the other headband wearing green nutcases do also make appearances in the form of rather handy assists that are often integral to progression. I feel like you can probably tell a lot about a person's personality type by which character they select in a Ninja Turtles game, but I think it's fairly obvious Michelangelo users aren't to be trusted. The assists are used at various points during the game and occur when the player touches the corresponding turtle on the bottom screen when they are flashing. Sometimes they come in the form of optional combat assists, sometimes they are necessary for solving a puzzle, and sometimes they will provide the requisite boost to access otherwise unreachable areas. To complete the game outright, you'll need to play through most of the stages multiple times, taking control of each turtle at various points, often repeating areas with different character-specific scenarios. Taking all of this into account, there are a rather impressive grand total of 50 levels in the main story campaign alone, meaning this is not a game you're going to breeze through in an afternoon. There are far more varied play mechanics contained within Mutant Nightmare than you would ever usually expect to find in this type of game, in addition to all the really fun assist parts and the surprisingly not that annoying touchscreen elements. There are several gameplay shifts throughout which constantly keep you on your toes. For those who have played the previous Konami Turtles GBA games, a feature that has been carried over is the regular paradigm shift in gameplay. Level 3 suddenly transitions into something akin to a Gradius or R-type style side-scrolling shooter stage, with action unfolding with April O'Neil hitching a ride in her flying space car thingy. Further to this, level 5 actually resembles an escort mission, with players tasked with helping Futuretoid escape, while simultaneously trying to collect precious blue crystals. Don't worry though, there is a far less annoying escort mission than the one you're probably picturing in your head right now. Stupid Ashley. The next set of stages sees our intrepid heroes return to the smelly sewers and back onto the streets, whilst pursuing Bishop, who wants to steal some of their mutant DNA, the swine. After battling the fancy suit-clad agent, we follow him beaming onto a large spaceship and continue our adventure high above the city. The following level sees us rendezvous with our pal Master Splinter as he accompanies us throughout the next area of the game, providing some much needed combat assistance from the hordes of bothersome enemies chipping about, thinking they bloody own the place. Next, things are slowed down somewhat as we are greeted with our first underwater section of the game, with thankfully no bombs to disarm or electrocuting seaweed in sight, so there will be no reliving of childhood trauma for you during this stage. Players are greeted with more familiar faces and characters from the recent cartoon the game is based on, as well as from further back in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles history, as we next encounter a load of pesky mousers before doing battle with the katana-wielding Karai, who eventually turns face and joins forces with our pizza-loving chums. After finally making it to Shredder and defeating the spiky-headed Git, we learn that he actually isn't the final boss of the game at all, and we're nowhere near the end yet. Our band of green slogan-spewing misfits now find themselves on a strange and mysterious planet with all manner of extraterrestrial unpleasantness to contend with. Back on Earth, the interesting gameplay variations continue as we hitch a ride with Raphael on the back of Casey Jones' impressive-looking Harley-Davidson-esque motorbike for an enjoyable full-scrolling driving section, before returning to some familiar looking areas for more button bashing goodness. There really is so much contained within that tiny little DS cartridge that it would be impossible to list all the goings on in Mutant Nightmares in this video. As well as the frankly huge amount of content and replay value on offer in the main story, there is an interesting battle mode that requires players to collect a set amount of crystals before the time runs out in a variety of complex and hazard-filled areas, all while being bothered and accosted by a bunch of pesky enemies. There is also a welcome wireless multiplayer option for those amongst you lucky enough to have any friends willing to play that also happen to have a copy of the game. Although, let's be frank, if you're wanting to play wireless DS multiplayer Turtles games in 2022, it's unlikely you have any friends anyway. GameSpot would review the game on release, praising the titles for its slick graphics and audio, the simple combat with a good variety of attacks, along with the game's large amount of stages. They would though draw criticism from the fact that fighting the same enemies can get repetitive, puzzle elements can upset the pacing, and that grabbing the stylus to do things at times can feel annoying. IGN would state they preferred the home console game of the same name, which they praised for having one of the best in-game unlockables of all time. The full arcade version of the classic video game Turtles in Time, which by default made Mutant Nightmare one of the best home console releases ever. Personally, I think that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 Mutant Nightmare isn't exactly a perfect game, despite all of the variations in gameplay. Repetition of the main mechanics and revisiting the same areas multiple times can get a little tedious, and it's not exactly the world's most innovative or original product. But Mutant Nightmare on the DS really has a lot to offer, even today, especially for those who missed out on all of the 2D Turtles games that were released post 16-bit era. A vast campaign with loads of replayability, tons of fan service and references to both the 2003 series as well as the franchise in general, great graphics and fun, a bit occasionally bland gameplay, make this an easy recommend to fans of TMNT, fans of 2D platformers, and just fans of simple, fun games alike. It's not a title that's ever going to win any awards or anything like that, but the apathetic reviews it received on release really don't do the game justice. Sometimes it's important to remember that reviewers are always looking at current games in a bubble and can only compare them to what else is available and whatever else is popular at the time. There is an absolutely endless list of games that are now revered and beloved that were mostly derided at the time for being too old-fashioned or not contemporary enough. But critics often forget timeless always trumps trendy, which is why Big Daddy Top Hat is the best. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 Mutant Nightmare. I hope you've enjoyed this little TMNT retrospective in which I managed to not say the word radical once. Well, apart from then, but that doesn't count. Before I close out today, I would like to ask you, what memories do you have of this particular Turtles game, or the Turtles franchise in general? Or perhaps, like many others, you weren't even aware that this 2D variation existed. Leave any thoughts in the comments below, or of course if there are any games or topics you'd like to see me cover in the future, then please feel free to discuss them down below. My aim is to make this channel stand out from all the others as much as possible. Speaking of engaging in this quest, none of this would even be possible without the small group of people who have gone that one step further than just watching, who are now backing what I produce via Patreon. Patrons of the channel can receive an end credit, a shout out at the end of each video, and access to videos before everyone else and more. So before we close, I would like to give a very special shout outs to the following people. A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heyo, Paula Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Corey Imar Sr., Ryan Dinched, Evan Border, Philip Manf, Azurakai, Dropkin Varela, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Duran, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Johnny Holly, August Piazza, Justin Wang, Capcom vs SNK, Hermes Gonzalez, Manshovel, Michael Hall, Sang Hee, Norma Stitz, Lanston Miller, Noob, Sarah Powell, Vlaming Renee, Marvin Liga, TOG Driver, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Ball, Chris Fisk, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Synth Spaces, Punk Toast, and everybody else who backed this channel via Patreon. Thank you so much for all of your support. Yeah, cheerio.